Welcome to the school call. Today we're going to be doing basic procurement training, and I'm going to allow another minute of schools to sign on. And so we can make sure we have some more participation because I see the number is still increasing. So I'm going to allow another minute before we do get started. Thank you. For those of you just coming on, I still see the participants number significantly increasing. So we are going to allow another minute before we start this training. Thank you. Okay, I think we'll go ahead and get started. The increasing of participants have slowed down a little bit. So welcome to procurement basics training. So the entire purpose of the school call today is for us to deliver a training on procurement basics. So what we'll be doing is we'll actually be conducting the training, and then we will allow for a question and answer session after the training. We will open the chat and the question and answer at that time. So please, if you have a question during the training, please write it down so that you can put it in the chat at the conclusion of the training. The training portion of this hour-and-a-half session, the training will be 1 hour and will allow for 30 minutes of questions and answers. So again, thank you very much for participating in the procurement basic training. Mr. Mitch Tyro will be the one conducting the training today. And then we do have a panelist of TDA subject matter experts on the phone that should be able to address any questions that y'all have afterwards. And at the conclusion of this training, what we're going to be doing is posting the webinar, the questions and answers, and a self-paced training on our Square Meals website that you can refer back to this training at any time. And for anyone else that had missed it, they can go on to squaremeals.org at any time and participate in the training, take the self-paced training, and view and listen to this webinar. So without further ado, I am going to hand it over to Mr. Mitch.
All right, well, thank you, Nicole, for the introduction, and thank everyone for being here. It was great to see some of you all in training in person here a couple of weekends ago in San Antonio. So we're excited to bring you this today, and we'll jump right into it. So we wanted you all to understand as we work through these procurement reviews, as we go through our training, as we visited with you all over the years, and especially over the procurement reviews this last year, we saw things that we really want to emphasize to help you all have a better program and an understanding of procurement that will be a overall success for your program moving forward. So let me just get cranked up here. Make sure I have everything set. There we go. And so let me just give the acknowledged statement, and then I'll move into the actual training. Now, you're going to hear a lot of things today that you have heard in the past. However, we've put them in such a way in this training that you can come back to this training, you can use this training to refocus or even to retrain new people that work for you as well that'll be touching procurement when it comes to child nutrition. And you're going to see things that we're going to mention over and over, and I'm going to start it right off, is we're going to talk about written procurement procedures a lot, because those written procurement procedures will be what is the consistency for your program to move forward and for you all to practice these in compliance procurement methods and procedures, and you'll have those written down. And so everything we talk about will always revert back to that. So you as a school district, as a child nutrition director, can have those written procedures that'll be specifically for you all. So let's get started. As we talk about program integrity, obviously TDA is at the center of that, or I should say program integrity is at the center, and then TDA is at the top, and we're all a part of this. So we're all together in this. And that's why it's so important, because when you talk about procurement really is always a basis for integrity, because all procurement has to be done at the highest integrity level. And that's why we have codes of conduct and such. And we'll talk about that more as well. So first slide up, forecasting. We want to be able to put forecasting up front, because that is so important as you all make ready for your written procedures, as you get ready to plan your budget, as you think about the new year coming up. And so it's very important that you understand forecasting, and that forecasting, when you understand it, when you have written your processes, then you can understand what it's there for, and how it moves to a year that you can actually feel comfortable and feel that you have a successful understanding of what you're going to need that year. So how do you get a look at that? How do you anticipate those type of things? Well, you do it through looking at what's happened in the past. You look at your student participation, your sales reports, prior budgets, velocity reports. There's items that you're going to pay a special attention to. That way you'll be able to say, okay, let's get a look at this. This is what we did last year. And now let's look at, see what's happening here. What kind of routine maintenance? Is there some kind of situation where maintenance has been telling you we're going to replace that piece of equipment because we've worked on it twice? And so these are the things that you're going to be talking about to yourself and to your procurement folks and to your kitchen people who are helping you with this process. What is the projected enrollment for this year? Will there be any new food programs required? Any additional purchases that we'll need? And really important is, what contracts do we have active right now? A lot of you all use cooperatives, so it's really good to familiarize yourself with the current contracts that are active, that are in place, that you can purchase from, and then you'll know exactly how you're going to move forward. Again, when you're talking about forecasting, you want to look at your future situation too. So are there going to be any program changes? Do we anticipate any opportunities for grants, any entitlement funding changing? How about, what we just saw in COVID? Are there going to be any campus closures, any consolidations? Do we see anything that can really change that moving forward? And again, replacing service lines, POS systems, or purchase of additional software. All of these items are going to help you develop a really good forecasting method that will allow you to move forward and to know what you're going to have in your budget, and what the big area here, the big opportunity here is for you to realize that you see all these things in the budget, you see all this forecasting, and you're going to realize, okay, I'm buying enough of that. It's well over a micro purchase threshold of $10,000. It's absolutely, going to always be around $35,000. So I'm going to need to get quotes on that, no questions asked. And if you're over 50, then you realize that I'm going to have to do a formal procurement, and I'm going to be asked when TDA does the procurement review, because they could very well sample that purchase. I'm going to need to provide those documents. So I see we have an active contract here that was done. I better gather all the documents. I want to make sure that all these things have been done. Of course, now this slide here, written procurement procedures, obviously we want it all to flow together. And again, it's the school's responsibility, it's the food nutrition director's responsibility to make sure you have good written procurement procedures. And these procedures, obviously we have done a lot of reviews and we see that a lot of times the business office will hand you a stack of procedures, say, here's how we do purchasing. And it may be a lot different than what you actually do in the food nutrition section. So we're asking and giving recommendations that school districts, that child nutrition departments, the child nutrition directors work with their business office and develop these processes, these procurement procedures, and have them written down that really speak and are really specific to the actual food operation. So you want to have real procurement activities that fit your food purchasing and everything that's bought with child nutrition money. We know that sometimes that can be different than Edgar or what the business office is used to actually working with. And that's why it's so important to have procedures that will fit your operation and your activities, because they really need to be unique to child nutrition funds, because that's what's going to be looked at during the review. You need to have all your procurement thresholds in there according to either the state thresholds, like I'll just use 50,000 is the simplified threshold. If your school district has it at 25, you want to make sure that you have that in your written procedures. You really want to make sure that all the procurement methods that you use are in that document. Contract management is a big part of this. You need to have an actual understanding of what it is that the kitchen staff, that you as a child nutrition director, that you do on a daily basis. That way, if there's a turnover, if you have new people coming in, these procurement procedures can actually help train your folks that are working in the kitchen, because they can actually understand and see, okay, this is how you make this purchase. Okay, you got to work with the business office to do this. And so me as a child nutrition director, oh, my role is this, very important. Cost and price analysis. We've talked about that a lot this year, and some of you all had to deal with it in your procurement reviews. And so it's very important that everybody understands what a cost price analysis is and when it's required through TDA and USDA rules and regulations. We'll talk more about these things further on in the presentation. You want to make sure that the Buy American provision is absolutely stated in your procurement procedures, and then obviously about how you keep your records. And you want to make sure that all of these things that you're writing into these procurement procedures is what's absolutely what you're doing and what's in compliance. That way, moving forward, you will have no problem knowing what I have to do. Let me give you an example here. Codes of conduct. Codes of conduct cannot be a hit and miss circumstance, or I'm going to go copy and paste from this codes of conduct over into my child nutrition, procurement procedures, because that may not work. You want to make sure that the food nutrition codes of conduct for purchasing, for procurement, that they have disciplinary actions for conflicts of interest. You want to make sure that they define staff roles and responsibilities, who's to do what, and what action is it to take if if a person is found where they're in violation of one of these circumstances where they're outside the codes of conduct and it's a violation according to your written procedures. What you always want to make sure is that your codes of conduct, they address conflicts of interest that actually govern the people or the employees who are engaging in any kind of selection for a bid or any kind of award for a bid, or even administrating that contract, even managing that contract, working with that vendor on a weekly or monthly basis. You want to make sure that these codes of conduct are only specific to the procurement using child nutrition funds. And there's a couple of things. Explicitly states that the CE prohibits real, this is direct language. CE prohibits real or apparent conflicts of interest for employees engaged in selection, award, administration of contracts. CEs prohibit officers, employees, and agents from soliciting or accepting gratuities, favors, or anything of monetary value from contractors or parties of subcontractors. Now, CEs can include additional language to define what's an acceptable minimal monetary value of circumstances if there's some kind of allowance for a very small gift. That needs to be spelled out in your codes of conduct. Now, understand that these codes of conduct have to have these items in them. They can be separate. It can be a standalone document that's not associated with your procurement procedures, or you can absolutely have the procurement procedures, have the codes of conduct included in the procurement procedures as titled page, something that you can go to and you have it all in one document, but it can be two documents. The main thing is you have to have those specific items in there. We talked a lot about cost price analysis this year. And as I've stated earlier, some of you dealt with this personally in your procurement review. So we want to make sure that everyone understands that this is the compliance standard that we're looking at when we come into your school district to do a procurement review. Prior to any formal procurement, the CE must conduct a cost price analysis. The CE is required to provide the cost price analysis during the procurement review. If you as a school district are conducting a formal procurement, you have to do the cost of price analysis prior to the procurement being completed. Actually, really, it's the first step. You should do the cost price analysis prior to the actual procurement. So that means before you start this formal procurement, you're going to do a cost price analysis that will give you an understanding of what would be a reasonable price for these items or this service that you're going out to bid for. Now, in cases where you use a cooperative, the cooperative should absolutely have that. It should be done prior to the procurement because we're going to ask for it during a procurement review. So that is one of the items about managing a contract. And that's why it's so important to write these things into your procurement procedures, because you'll be able to read and understand, okay, prior to this formal procurement, I'm going to need to conduct a cost price analysis just to see what this service or what this product that I'm buying, what is it costing? I need an estimate on it. And so again, you want to make sure that's been done, because if you're buying from an active contract, you want to make sure that that's already been done and you have that in your hands. That's why I said when you're forecasting and you talk about those active contracts and find out what's at play here, you can actually make sure you already have that documentation and you know that you're in good shape, ready for a review because you had that cost of price analysis, because obviously the procurement has already been done. You're already purchasing off of it. Very important, but it's important to include these things in your, I'm gonna have to go back, y'all, excuse me. There we go. It's important to include all of these items in your written procurement procedures. And that's again, and I'm going to state it over and over, that's why it is recommended that child nutrition has their own procurement procedures that are specific to everything that's required by USDA. This is a sample statement on cost price analysis that could be placed into a procurement procedure. A cost price analysis will be conducted for every procurement action in excess of simplified acquisition threshold. What that means is that a cost price analysis is going to be conducted for everything that's over $50,000 if you follow the state simplified threshold. However, if you have a district who board has set it at 25 or 30,000 or whatever, then that would be the number, and that would be your simplified threshold. And then you insert the person's position, child nutrition director, the supervisor will use current market pricing, historical data, velocity report, and or additional forecasting tools as appropriate in determining an estimated cost of an item of service. Now, remember that we don't have a particular form, and this is up to the school district or the cooperative, whoever is doing this cost price analysis, to understand. And I'm not saying that it has to be, we give you some really good samples here, but at the end of the day, there's lots of ways through the internet to find out what something's priced at or what some service costs. It's very important, though, to make sure that's written down and documented. So let's talk about micro purchase. We're going to go through the purchases, the micro, the small, and the formal, to just kind of give everybody a basic understanding, something that you look back on. You're going to have access to this. So as you write your procurement procedures, you'll be able to use these documents to help you in what your current practice is and make sure that you're in compliance, and then you'll be able to follow those moving forward. Obviously, there's been a lot of talk about the micro purchase threshold. Right now, the micro purchase threshold is $10,000 or less, but that will be changing, and we'll be moving to a threshold much like, actually just like TEA. We're going to in fact use the TEA self-certification method, and school districts will have an opportunity to move their threshold or increase their threshold, some even up to $50,000. And that will be coming out soon, and we'll be letting you all know how that will take place. But just to be sure, that's already been implemented by TEA. And I want to make sure all you all in the food nutrition section understand that. And so school districts are already working on their self-certifications. And so TDA will have an opportunity, our understanding is, to be able to get a list of those certifications for those school districts, and we'll be able to see what your new micro purchase threshold is according to the process that's certified that your board approves. There's 3 elements to a micro purchase. The price has to be reasonable, and you have to be able to buy those products or services from other qualified vendors. That means you cannot use one vendor. You have to be able to distribute that to other qualified vendors. So, and then obviously the last but not the least is that it has to be under $10,000. So that means if you're purchasing a service or a particular product, and you in a year, in an annual program year, and you purchase over $10,000 worth of that product or that service, then that would be considered a finding because you went over the micro purchase threshold. Anything over $10,000 must be purchased either through quotes, or if it goes over 50, it is required to have a formal procurement. And again, when you write these specifically in your procurement procedures, you have a document that you can go back to, and you can understand this is what I need to do each and every time. And if I got somebody new, they can take a look at this. This will be like your handbook. This will be like your procurement handbook, your procedures will, and they will encompass everything that you do and everything you do with the business office, and it'll be specific to the food nutrition department. And we really find that when school districts do that, it's helpful in moving forward and staying in compliance. The small procurement method requires 2 or more quotes. That's the very minimum. Obviously, 3 would be preferred. We have seen some school districts that have went out and received 4 quotes. That's fantastic. It's one of those circumstances that I'm going back to, because how you have that defined and written out in your procedures is what you need to follow. And when it complies with USD regulations, then you don't have any concerns when a procurement review takes place, because your procedures are written correctly in compliance, and you have purchases where you actually have documentation to back up that you did solicit 2 or more quotes, and that you received that information back and you chose on price and you made a decision, made a selection. And that's why it's so important to have these things written down. And remember, a small procurement method is is over the micro purchase. So anytime you go over $10,000, you're getting into either a small procurement threshold or a formal procurement threshold, one of the two. So micro versus small, what is the best direction to go? I will tell you all that the recommendation is always get quotes. Quotes will always be the best business practice for items that are purchased that are not formal, that are under the 50,000. However, micro purchases were put in place. So when things come up that weren't planned or really something that where you were shorted, that was the original intention. And that's great because you can go out and purchase those things without getting quotes. And it really works very well. However, you have to make sure that all of the actual elements of a micro purchase are in place. And we saw some findings on that this year. And so that's why we want to make sure that everybody has this written very clearly in their procedures, that it has to be an item that you can purchase from more than one vendor. It has to be an item that annually you're not going to pay more than, you're not going to go over $10,000 for that service or for those goods, and that the price is reasonable. So in a procurement review, what we're seeing is that there may be items that were purchased that were under $10,000, but that doesn't automatically make it a micro purchase because, and I'll give you an instance where there was a cleaning service where it was an annual agreement where they would be the one that would be cleaning out the item where there was a grease trap or where there was some special equipment. However, and you could even throw janitorial in that, or you could put any other service in that situation, and maybe even certain products. Because what we found is they called it a micro purchase because under $10,000, but it did not meet the element of being able to purchase that from multiple vendors. So that's why it's very important to write those into your procurement procedures. That way you'll know, hey, look, even though this is under $10,000, I really only need one vendor for this, like all year. So you would get quotes in that situation. That's why small versus micro is still very important, still be into play. Now, obviously, when micro purchase goes up, I want you to know that all that is still in play. So there will be times, even if you increase your micro purchase threshold to 50,000 or 35, there'll be times when a particular goods or service are needed, it'll be something that I can't use multiple suppliers here. Then you'll need to get quotes because it doesn't fit a micro purchase because it's not for multiple vendors. Very important to remember. Let's talk about values and thresholds and aggregate, because that is always something that comes up, and we saw it again this year. And when we talk about aggregate is just a term for total. So what are you paying total? And in total, that's why I put the word threshold in there, is because the thresholds are really the total. You cannot go over that threshold or you get into the next higher level of procurement. So I'll give you an example here. Products or services that are classified in similar categories, similar products or services from the same vendor. This could be a single one-time purchase with an aggregate amount, under 10,000, or it could be multiple purchases of the same or similar product and or services from a vendor during the fiscal year with an aggregate that doesn't go over 10,000. But once you see that those line items, those categories in your budget, those categories that you formulate in forecasting, when you see that those items annually are going to be over $10,000 well, then you know, and that's why forecasting is very important. Cost price analysis is important. You say, look, I'm looking back. It's been $16,000 every year for the last 2 years. So I can't do that. I can't do that. I'm going to have to get quotes on that. And that's what small procurement is for. And that's what you want to make sure that it's always about the total of the product for the annual, year, program year. Bottom line is that service or that product, if you buy more than $10,000, you went over the micro purchase threshold, you've went into the small procurement threshold, and sometimes even it's increased up and you went over $50,000 and you're into a formal procurement. Let me give you some examples. Let's just run through a few of these, and let's have a little quiz, a little thought-provoking micro purchase or small purchase. So you found out you have some critter, some varmint inside your dry storage warehouse, and you're going to need to get that resolved. Well, you've called around, and there are exterminators that deal with this type of situation, and it looks like it's going to be somewhere around $3,500 because it takes them about a week to 2 weeks. They have to set out traps. They have to make sure they have the correct bait and all that sort of thing. So think about that. You have another situation where you have the cooler that's went down, and you have a lot of milk. So you have to run out and you have to purchase ice, and ice can be purchased anywhere. So you just go to the first place where you can buy 200 bags, or you may have to go to 2 places to buy 200 bags of ice, but you're well within the 10,000 threshold. Now we're talking about some kind of monthly pest control service. So this will be something that you're going to look at, and you say, okay, well, I have this service. However, it looks like they came out 4 times last year, and I paid them $4,000 a piece. I paid them $4,000 each invoice. So the invoice is under $10,000. However, that same service, you're paying that company, whether it be the same company or different companies, that is a category. Small or micro? Small. So with these 3 actual, what I call examples, we want you to think about, looks like we have one more sample as well. So when you're putting together your forecasting and your budgets, and you're putting your categories together, make sure you understand those categories, and you don't, and I use the example as, of office supplies. If the child nutrition department is purchasing $15,000 or $16,000 worth of office supplies every budget year, every program year, well, then it could be misconstrued, and I say so misconstrued. It's what we call circumventing the proper procurement method. If you said, you know what I'm going to do, I'm going to buy $3,000 worth of pencils, I'm going to buy $6,000 worth of paper, I'm going to buy $3,000 worth of toner, and so those type of categories are not realistic, and those are items that would need to be categorized correctly in forecasting, so you could understand how you're over $10,000. And so this would absolutely be a situation where you would be able to say, you know what, micro purchase is not going to work. This is office supplies. It's, and you have to think about it like this. Remember, I talked about integrity. You have to always think about integrity. So is this correct? Does this comply with integrity? Is it fair and open competition? But more importantly, does it fall in line with the procurement method that is required? And am I kind of doing something just to get around that? Very important. So you have a case of colored printer paper for National School Lunch Week. Case of colored printer paper. I guess that could be pretty expensive, but let's give you a little bit more. Let's make this a little bit more intense. So if we bought $5,000 worth of this paper, and that's all that we purchased. However, mentioning office supplies, if we saw we're going to need that much paper, colored printer paper, and we look at our office supplies, we're already over 12, could we separate this out? Not really. It's part of office supplies. So it's something that you really need to think about as you're planning, as you're forecasting. And again, if you will write this into your procurement procedures, you will absolutely have all this outlined, so there won't be a question on what you do. Okay. And again, there's some other ones. This one is pretty straightforward. It's definitely a micro. And in these cases where I always put it like this, because I like to always play the integrity card, because that's something that we all have to embrace when it comes to procurement and regulations. And so again, if this is a one-off, this is one of those things, hey, I know I'm never going to breach the 10,000 this particular product or service, well, then you're good to go. And let me give you an example of this micro and this bread. If you were consistently purchasing $9,000 worth of bread every year, you had it consistently laid out, you're a small district, and you had something where you were shorted and you had to run out and purchase bread from the first place you could find it, and it puts you over for that year, that's a circumstance that could very well be documented and explained. Because what we're seeing is that, hey, this is not a systematic problem. This has happened. It was really a problem, and I had to go get what I could get. And so, again, in those situations, always document it. If there's a little thought process where you say, this may look like I'm going, like I'm trying to circumvent, well, please, that circumstance is unique to you. So write those circumstances down, record them, put them with that invoice, and that way you're covered if there's any issue moving forward. So we're talking about 3 procurement methods right now. We just went over micro. We talked about small and how to know the difference. And really, you can see that quotes are a good thing and are really a good practice if you do everything that way. And then on those exceptions, then you do the micro. Again, it's about how you write your procedures. So let's jump into formal. Informal, you're going to have either request for proposal, we call it RFP, or invitation for bid, which would be an IFB. A lot of you all use cooperatives. So again, I'm going to go back to that statement. Make sure you understand with your cooperative what is active, the contracts that you can purchase from, the vendors that are under contract. Know what your limitations are, know the solicitation on those, because that's going to come up quite a bit. We're going to talk about that. Let's first let's talk about. We had some questions about how does formal, what does that have to do with capital expenditures? So let me show you that. We've had some capital expenditures approved through TXUMPS, as you all know the process it goes through. That approval does not give you, that's not procurement approval. That is the approval to spend the money. So once that you have that approved to spend the money, then the school district must follow the normal procurement procedure, and it all is dependent upon the cost, because that will determine what threshold you'll be within to purchase. So again, when those capital expenditures go through TXUMPS and you see approved on that, that's approval to spend the money. It's not approval for procurement, because that procurement needs to be done. Now, are we asking to approve procurement? No, you're getting a capital expenditure approval to spend the money. However, you know that during a procurement review, we're going to look at those purchases and we're going to make sure those purchases follow the correct procurement method. On an invitation for bid, these formal proposals that some schools do and some schools rely upon cooperatives to complete are really about price. They don't have really anything technical involved with them. It's like, we want the best price on this piece of equipment, or we want the best price on these products or on this service. And so that's why these are a lot more simpler. You put out a very specific solicitation, and it has all the items that you're wanting to purchase or the services that you're needing to purchase. And usually you will, when you advertise that, you will put when those when this bid must be back to the school district, to the cooperative. So you'll also put in there that, hey, they have to be returned by this date, and then on this date at 3 o'clock, the bids will be open, and then the awards will take place. Very important to understand the difference between an invitation for bid and an RFP. Invitations for bids are really more price point, a lot more simpler concept when it comes to procurement. But remember, whether it's invitation for bid or it's a request for proposal, I want you to see this word right here. They're both considered a solicitation. Both of these, an IF, invitation for bid, and an RFP, request for proposal, are both considered solicitations. So please take note that when we use the word the solicitation, we're talking about something that was advertised out. That's why we say when you solicit bids, you're going out to the marketplace and you're trying to get quotes on this particular item. The formal method is just a little bit more in depth. And so remember, when we say solicitation, we're talking about all these things as a whole. Just don't want you to be confused on that. Request for proposal is a little bit more detailed, because a lot of times there's like technical parts of it. There's items that they're not just price point. There may be some design, or I shouldn't say design. There may be some areas that need to be worked out that are not about price. And so an RFP gives the proposers an opportunity to offer up the way they would do it, the way they will deliver, or how their schedule, or these things. So that's why you see the difference in the request for proposal versus invitation for bid. But I want to clue in on this, because you're always going to have solicitations, whether you're doing a small or you're into the formal here. You have something that's going out, and what's going out in these formals is in detail telling the vendors how they're going to be evaluated. You're going to have all these required clauses in there that you see, Buy American being one of the major ones. And you want to make sure that you don't restrict competition. And in RFPs, especially on these large grocery bids where you may have 2,000 or 3,000 items, you may decide beforehand to do the market basket analysis. And so you want to put all that out in this RFP. So it's very important that when this RFP is placed out into the public view or this invitation for bid, that everything is identified. That means that you're telling the vendor, this is exactly how we're going to score you. We're going to score you upon this particular criterion. We're going to make sure that that if there's any, and this is maybe a clause, because we're going to talk about this. You see this last bullet point. Additional purchases off bid items must be specified as a percentage contract of the value, not to exceed, if not specified or exceed document allowed, percentage charge would be unallowable. So let's talk about that. I want to clue in on that. When you put out this solicitation, you or the cooperative, but we're asking school districts to really manage these contracts, so you will understand what you have. Do you have a contract that allows you to purchase items that are not on the specifications? Because in normal procurement, if you don't have an opportunity to purchase above or the solicitation, so let me give it to you like this. If you have 1,500 items on this grocery bid, and you don't have any kind of additional provision that talks about you can buy these additional items up to a percentage, then all you can purchase off that contract is the items on the solicitation. You cannot purchase anything else. So with that said, it's very important for you to know what's on that specification as a school that's a part of that cooperative. That way you purchase those items. And you need to find out if that contract that's active that you're purchasing off of has this bottom bullet here, has this language that allows additional items to be purchased. Because what happens is we've seen several contracts that have this additional percentage in there that allows the school district to purchase items 10% up to 10% of the value of the contract. So obviously, if you got $1 million contract, you can purchase $100,000 in extra items. However, each year that contract renews, it can never, you have to add those items back into the renewal. So you'll always have your contract, your original contract that has a solicitation, that has actual items, the grocery items that you can purchase. And then at the renewal, all those items that were purchased and they did not go over that amount, that 10%, those will be set out in the renewal. So each year, and if you're with this contractor, this is a vendor that you're on your third year, you'll have the original items you can buy, you'll have the renewal items, and then you'll have these other items. None of those items can ever go over in the amount where it would be 10%. I'm going to use a 10% in this case, or that would be a situation where you wouldn't be able to purchase. You'd have to go out and purchase. You can purchase, but you just can't purchase under this contract because you've already went over the value of the contract, and you would need to purchase that according to whatever procurement method you felt like would be appropriate. I'll give you an example. Hey, I want to buy these additional products. Great. I'm 3 or 4 months into the school year. I got this much time left. I'm going to purchase $20,000. Whether you do a separate bid or you go out and put quotes out to 2 or 3 of these grocery suppliers and you get a bid on that. That's how you purchase if you don't have the percentage in there. It's pretty straightforward. But again, I want to talk about these required clauses. I've mentioned them. These are the clauses. They're all over federal regulations, and some of them apply and some of them do not. You'll see Buy American. It's the biggie here for us because that absolutely has to be in those contracts. When I say some things don't apply, because a lot of times there's a few of these that are specific just to contracts or what I would say, construction. So the evaluation factors, I touched on it, but I really want to bring this home to make sure that in anything that you solicit or any formal procurement you put out, you have to abide, and you can only score those vendors according to what's in that evaluation factor. Those are evaluation criteria, and if it says they get 10 points, well then they get 10 points if they in fact that vendor did what was required in the evaluation. And that's why it's very important not to have personal bias get into these type of situations, because evaluators, whoever's evaluating a contract, cannot be associated with that vendor or have any situation that could be a conflict of interest. It has to be evaluated on these criteria. And you see a few criteria here in front of you. You've seen these in RFPs, but I'm asking you to be sure and look at that. And this is part of that contract management, because you as a child nutrition director or a supervisor in a kitchen staff, it is your responsibility to make sure that when these things take place, that you are abiding by those. So if you're asked to be an evaluator, you have to go by what the evaluation criteria is, and you can't vary from that. And you can't, one of the things we see is, oh, reporting systems. Well, if you were going to give 10 points here, and you said an RFP, there has to be a reporting system, and for supplying that reporting system in your RFP, you get 10 points. If both vendors give you a reporting system, well, they both get the 10 points. The biggie here is cost. Cost has to be the most heavy weightedest. It has to have the most scoring points, and obviously it does here. And what really comes home here is that cost cannot be subjective. Cost is just pure math. So there's prearranged formulas, and when you're talking about these RFPs, it's pretty simple because they have line items, and you add all those line items up according to the quantities, and it's pretty easy to see who comes in first. Hey, this is the lowest price on all these goods and all this volume, and then here's second, here's third. So remember, it's always math. There's no subjectivity in that. And then obviously you award the contract, and the contract must be awarded to the lowest offer or the offer that is most advantageous to the program. Now let's talk about this. Let's make sure price should always win out. However, occasionally there may be something where a price was very close and you chose this other. Those others have to be, I mean, that's how protests come into play. And another vendor will say, well, look, I had the best price, I should have won. And so that's why these evaluation meetings, these evaluation committees that are done by cooperatives and school districts are very important, to be specific and have integrity and have the instructions for everybody follows the same direction on how they score. And again, if you're going to go something other than price, there has to be a really good selection justification, and that should be placed in the file to know why was this not done with price. There's inadequate competition. I'm going to touch on this just for a little bit, because you all as a school district, as cooperatives, they can do everything correct in their RFPs, in their advertisement, in their solicitation, and even you at a school district, say you have a cooperative doing your formal, you very well could put out a really nice, you could solicit 4 bids, and you could give them really good directions, specifications, we call it, specs on what it is you need to purchase. And you may only get back one actual quote. Well, that doesn't mean you did anything wrong. That just means that you only got one quote. You did everything right. Now, we do have this in here because it's very important, because we do this even at the state level. If we don't get any quotes, or we may get one quote, we're going back to see, did we restrict this anyway? Did we actually say something in the RFP, or did we put something in our solicitation documents that concerned the vendors? And sometimes vendors even let you know, hey, I didn't bid on it because you said this or that. And so that's the kind of stuff. If you don't have any of that, well, then you're able to go. You don't need approval from TDA. There was some language, or maybe there was some confusion back several years ago, that if you only got one bid back, you got to go ask for a sole source. You do not ask for a sole source approval, because you did solicit. So you've done everything you need to do. You just got one quote. So you're going to be good there. If you determine that there is problems, you just go back and resolicit. Pretty straightforward. Okay, I've said this probably 2 or 3 times. Contract management is very important. That was one of the main issues we saw as we moved through the procurement reviews and talked to school districts. Invoices come in, and school districts need to know, even have a list of those specifications, have a list of what they ordered. It's usually really good to have before you order, because what we talked about, you cannot order anything from a contract, from a vendor that's under contract, unless it was on the specifications. And if it wasn't on the specification, and there's no percentage rule clause in that RFP, well, then you're going to have to purchase that item using some other procurement method, whether it be usually the best way to go is just get quotes on those items, and then you're good to go. However, if you see that, wait a minute, I still got 6 months to go in the school year. I could easily purchase $70,000 or $80,000 worth of items, and I don't see it on our specs. Well, then either you or the cooperative will have to do a formal bid and put those items out there, so you'll have another contract that you can buy off of where you'll be in compliance. Document everything and make sure that you understand those cooperative contracts, because you're purchasing off those cooperative contracts. You need to make sure you understand if they have the percentage in there, the clause that allows you to purchase things that are not on the original solicitation. And then you have to keep up with that, because every year those items are going to be added back in to the actual renewals to make sure that doesn't go over that contract value, that 5 or 10%, whatever clause they're using. But if there's no clause, you can make no purchases except the items that are on the original solicitation. Anything else, you'll have to do your own procurement method. And I'm telling you that the contract and the invoices, when you understand the contract, then you understand how to track these invoices. And anything that you purchase other than that, you need to make sure you have that, because what we found is just because there would be a contract awarded to Labatt and there would be 2,500 items on that, the schools would, some schools were purchasing, $10,000 of items, and we had invoices and they weren't on the solicitation, and they were just purchasing off bid, not knowing how to track that. And that the findings really came into play, because that's all about contract management. So again, you put that contract management into your written procedures, and that way anybody that comes along behind you can see this is how you do this, this is why you do this, and it works very well. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on non-procurement, merchant and sole source, because you all have done a good job. The SCs have helped us out, and we see that everybody, most everybody now is using our portal, or I should say squaremills.org, and our link. This is basically a jot form. So when you have an emergency procurement situation, and by the way, there was quite a few of y'all that submitted them correctly on SSO because you had a contract. The SSO didn't have a contract. You didn't have a letter from your legal. So you submitted emergency procurement. We approved that SSO. We've seen a lot more where there was a situation with an emergency of equipment or something, and you did a great job of articulating it. There have been, I think, only 2 that we had to give technical assistance on, say this is not an emergency. You have, demonstrated in your narrative here that you have time to get quotes. And so because of that, you need to actually submit quotes, or not even worry about emergency procurement. You have time, because it looks like this doesn't need to be, you have all summer and you have an opportunity to get this worked on. Little things like that. So make sure when you're submitting emergency that you can actually articulate that emergency in that narrative, so we can say, yes, absolutely, we agree, and get it done. Remember, you can't always get these done simultaneously or beforehand. So, when you come in that morning and that freezer is out, you got to get somebody there to repair it, and you got to move all that stuff out. So we ask and that you submit those emergencies to us as quick as possible. That way we can see there's not a lot of time. And we're not going to be able to approve those when they're 3 months, 4 months out. So schools that are doing it right, they're saying, hey, I had to fix this. They go into detail about it, and they showed me an invoice they paid in the last week. Those are easy. Sole source, seeing a lot more sole source, especially on Heartland, Premarital Edge, and those situations where you all cannot buy it from anybody else. It's proprietary. And again, and just remember, not all brand name items are proprietary, because many times you can buy these items from different suppliers. So just because it's a Maytag or particular type of ice machine, it may be one manufacturer, but you can absolutely purchase those items from different suppliers. So that way, that would be a real example of quotes. We're going to run through a case study here, because we want you to be able to understand how, when you put your procurement procedures in place and you have them written as they should, you're going to be able to absolutely have written procedures that tell the story, that tell you exactly what you need to do, on each solicitation, whether you need an evaluation, how you award, basically, even simple things like quotes, it's a price. And so we award to the lowest price. An exception would have, and you may have something as simple as this, any exception to price on a quote would have to be documented in a narrative and attached to the invoice. In that way, it covers you in the case of a procurement review. You're going to have something about cost price analysis. All these things are going to be very important to move the written procedures forward and to help you with this case. I'm talking about a case study because I got one coming up here. But at the end of the day, I'm saying that, let's give you an example. Ivy is the case study here. So at Ivy School, she's looking at her procedures, written procurement procedures. They tell Ivy, actually for the district, that she will conduct a cost price analysis at the first step in her procurement process. Like we stated earlier, before the procurement process takes place, when we're talking about formal, you must do a cost price analysis. Obviously, Ivy's school district has a 25,000 threshold. So anything over 25,000 is going to require formal procurement. Okay. So these procedures, obviously the codes of conduct are part of that. So Ivy's been able to read through that and understand what that is. And so what she needs to purchase is Smart Snacks in this upcoming year. And there's no bid for it. There's no cooperative. There's no active contract. And these are items that she really saw, really sold well. And she wants to do this herself. Good opportunity here. And so she does a cost price analysis. She looks at velocity reports. She looks at these invoices. She sees student surveys, what she actually, what they like, what sold, what didn't sell. And so she comes up with a method here, and she actually was able to see what she sold, what it cost, and what the total was. And she realized, hey, the previous year they spent $73,000 and they made some great revenue too. Okay, so this is easy. This is a good, you got good justification to do this. She's following her procurement procedures. She even outlines it, something of this factor. Now, not everybody has to go this far. If you know it's going to be over $73,000, well, then you easily know it's formal procurement. So over 73, she begins and she searches, she finds all these vendors. She actually finds that in her area, there's not that many vendors, but if she looks around the surrounding cities and the suburbs, there's a lot of vendors. So now she plans on soliciting this in an advertisement that gets to those communities. So now she's really opening her opportunities to get a lot of quotes back, a lot of proposals. All this is in her written procurement procedures. And it should all be in your procedures, and it should be specific to child nutrition funds, which will really help you, and it'll help you learn how to what your role is versus the business office, and it'll allow them to see this as well. And so this is really a partnership, and it really works. Obviously, I've talked to a lot of y'all about the business office and how they follow Edgar a lot of times, and how sometimes it seems to be some conflicts. This is a good way to say, here's why we're doing this, is because we have findings. And if we don't want findings, then we need to have our own procurement procedures in place, because they really will. If you follow them correctly and they're in compliance, you won't have any, you'll really see a change in your processes, and your processes will be compliant. And then when we ask for documentation, you're going to have that documentation. So here's how she goes into this. It's a formal, so obviously she's doing it with an invitation for bid. Make sure that she has the appropriate provisions in there. The Buy American clauses are stated in certification, and it's really clear that these are Buy American products, and there's a way to certify it. It's very clear that any vendor that bids on this has to understand what this is and will abide by it. She gives brand names. She actually even gives an evaluation of how she's going to score these snacks and how the winning vendor is going to be decided. So she evaluates these things, and what she finds out is that she's working through this. She finds out that the assistant director of child nutrition has a brother that works for one of the vendors, and he's a sales manager, so he's directly involved in this. So what she has to do is basically, that's a conflict of interest. So she basically documents that conflict of interest, and she still has 7 remaining bids. She moves through and she awards the bid. Okay. So my point through this whole thing is that this school district had a written process for micro, for small, and it wasn't just some formal, it wasn't some pasted in there from the business office from Edgar. It really was what they do. And even in this formal exercise that we had, they had those little items in there that, and again, when those are followed, they really make a big difference because you're doing what's in compliance. How do you know that? Because you wrote these in compliance. So if you follow these, you're going to be in compliance. So the takeaway is written procedures, written procedures, written procedures. Let them be the handbook for the child nutrition program there specific to your school district. All procurement activities should be conducted exactly as indicated in the written procedures. So again, when you follow as a school, and I know it's going to be burdensome to write this correctly the first time, but once you get this written correctly, you're going to have a document that you can update annually, and it'll be there for training. It'll be there for you to reflect on, I hadn't done one of these in a while. Let me go back and see what the requirement is. It really works. It really works. And then, of course, if you do something wrong, it's usually because you deviated from that. And that's why you want to make this very important to all the kitchen supervisors and folks that are involved in procurement. Well, that leads us to the end of it. And we wanted to have about 30 minutes. So we're going to have about 24 minutes. That's fantastic. So we're going to get right into the questions. Obviously, y'all know the contacts at squaremeals.org. And then obviously my email's out there as well. I think it was on the very front slide. We're going to put all this up as well on our website. So what we're going to do, I'm going to ask Nicole to help. She was very helpful in doing this before. And so we're going to take questions. And remember, this is your time to ask questions. We have this whole panel. So you just don't have to hear me talk. We have all the other experts here as well. So if you've ever want to talk to school nutrition folks at TDA, this is your opportunity. Take it away.
Yes, thank you, Mitch. I appreciate it. And so we do have all of our subject matter experts on the phone. So the chat has now been opened, so you can record your question there. And so what I'll be doing is reading the questions out for the answers. So the first one is from John. We have been denied in TXUMPS for our capital expenditure over 50K because we use 3 quotes from different awarded purchasing cooperatives such as buy boards or regional service centers. Could you offer advice on how to use purchasing cooperatives for a capital expenditure over 50K?
Yes, that's a great question, John. And let me tell you that what we find in these, in some of these buy boards and even some of these cooperatives, and we've talked a lot about that this year because of the findings and the non-compliance, is that what we are seeing is that when you try to purchase formally under that buy board or that cooperative, those are usually catalog bids where there wasn't a solicitation that was put out that had your needs on there. So you need this equipment, and there should be a specification on that equipment. What's lacking in this is that they can't provide the cooperative, the school district, if they go this route, they cannot provide the formal procurement documents where there was a specification for the equipment that you wanted, and you got quotes back, or you got in this situation you got proposals back, and you awarded the best price. So the short answer is usually it's because of the specifications. They're not specific to what you want to purchase. They're more in general, and they're like a percentage off, and that's not in compliance.
Okay, from Whitney, do health department permit costs need to be approved as a sole source? The local county is the only one who can perform this service.
Yes, we've actually done that twice. I got TDA received 2 of those this year. because some school districts are very large and they have a budget for this and they can't purchase anywhere else. And it doesn't fall into micro, even if it's under $10,000, because it's a sole source. And so they put in a sole source through the JOT form and it was approved. So yes, sole source is very acceptable under those circumstances.
Okay, from Marianne, how often do procurement procedures need to be updated?
We find that they need to be updated when there's changes in the ARM or a USDA makes a change, and that's communicated. So what we ask is that obviously at a minimum it's looked at annually, but again, look what's happening here. We're fixing to, there's fixing to be a big move to increase the micro purchase. And if you just looked at them at the end of the year, now you're going into this next year, and that's not going to be correct. So it needs to be done annually, and anytime there is a change, anytime that change is communicated to you as a school district.
Okay, from Derek, aggregate must be by commodity or category. Our auditor this year told us aggregate was by vendor. Why this confusion? And so also, Derek, I'm going to ask you to, if you can specify your district below, so we could call you individually to talk through this scenario with you, but I'll let you take a general answer, but I would like to get your information to talk more specifically.
No, thank you, Cole, because we could go into detail on this, but sure. The short answer is that many times buying from a particular vendor, you are purchasing the same service or the same goods. That's where the finding comes into play, because you've already, when you do that, you went over the threshold. However, if there's an issue, it would come into play where the vendor sells two completely separate categories in a budget, or in a budget categories. So you could in theory have a vendor that you purchased $60,000 worth of items from, but 30,000 of it could be one particular item in the budget and 30 something else, and they're unrelated. So that's why this is not cookie cutter perfect every time. And so I would say let's talk to you individually, because just because you purchase from a vendor and it's over a certain threshold, we would need to see and look at those purchases and see what category and make sure it's not the same product or same service.
Okay, from David, can you do your own price cost analysis internally prior to purchasing from a cooperative if they did not do it?
Well, the problem with that, David, is the standard that USD put forward is it has to be done prior to the formal procurement. So we can't go back and redo paperwork. So that's why there were quite a few findings this year. Some schools did it, some cooperatives did it, some schools did not, some cooperatives did not. So no, you would not be able to do that internally unless it was done prior to the formal procurement. So yes, a school district, even if they have a cooperative, says we're going to go out and do this with bread, with milk, or grocery items. If the school wanted to do that for the items they use, by all means, that's really part of that contract management and really knowing what they need to do, and that could be in the procurement. So, but it cannot be done after the fact, David.
Okay, and Derek had a follow-up question. Is the aggregate just for the 240 child nutrition funds?
That's correct. I mean, Derek, we're looking at child nutrition purchases, money that's used to purchase items. So if an item is purchased using general fund money, we don't have any authority over that money.
Okay, from Crystal, can you please clarify the proper procurement method for software and annual subscription that falls under the micro purchase threshold? Does that require sole source, or can it be purchased using micro purchase? I've heard conflicting information and want to be sure we're doing it correctly. Thank you. Crystal,
thank you for asking that question, because we have answered it individually in emails. I've had to respond to some of these emails, so I'm glad you put it out here for us all to hear. Yes, because that sole source, even if it's under $10,000, can only be provided by one vendor So it does not fit the micro purchase because it's missing the element of using multiple vendors. And for a micro purchase to be in compliance, it has to fit all the elements. So in this case, yes, you would need to seek sole source approval through TDA, through our system, and that would be granted because we're seeing a lot of that, even under 10K.
Okay. From Steve, we just went out for bids on new steam tables and kitchen equipment that was damaged during Hurricane Harvey. This will be paid through FEMA funds, not child nutrition funds. Should this be approved through TXUMPS?
Well, I'm gonna yield to school ops on this, but because it's not our money, TXUMPS capital expenditures are things that are purchased with our money. Because remember, and we're approving for you to spend the funds, and I don't know unless that FEMA money is
I
put
agree,
into the
Mitch.
240 account.
Yeah, I
Nicole?
agree, Mitch. I agree.
Okay, all right,
Yes.
thank you.
Okay, from Miranda, can you elaborate on when purchasing local produce? For example, when we use local produce even throughout the year for certain events like National School Breakfast and Farm Fresh Challenge, we spend over $50,000 in food category. How would I procure this?
Well, you said the magic word, Miranda. It's produce. And USDA gives a lot of opportunity to have to do produce purchasing much different. And the reason they do that is probably for the same reason TDA does gasoline that way, because it's commodity, the prices change, and you can't get anybody to give you a price for any length of time, especially a year. So yes, you have the opportunity to do it several different ways, as long as you absolutely keep good records on that procurement. So yeah, you're definitely going to go over 50,000 in many cases. We see many schools that do it. And the way they do procurement produce, they have 4 or 5, 6 good suppliers. You may only have 2 if you're a smaller school and have an area where you only have 2 suppliers. But what you do, you put out a bid based upon your menu a month at a time, 2 weeks at a time, 2 months at a time, however long that you can commit, that you can get a produce company to commit to pricing. Well, then you stretch that out 2 weeks, a month, whatever, and you keep up with that, and you write that in your procurement procedures. And because it's a commodity with differing prices, and obviously, very perishable, you're going to be good to go. So that's the only category where we do have opportunities to get to do it different than the strict procurement threshold that we do with everything else.
Thank you. From Jeannie, for informal small purchase, if 3 quotes are sought and only 1 vendor responds, is this adequate for this purchase type?
Yes, you're adequate. And again, we touched on it, but you just want to make sure that you did everything right at your level, and you're fine. Now, again, the reason you're looking at your own self in this is self-examination, these type of things. You only got back 1 quote or 1 vendor response. Just had a school talk to me the other day. This school did a fantastic job. They put out 3 quotes. They solicited 3 quotes from 3 different vendors. Only 1 vendor responded. They emailed those other 2 vendors back. Can you tell me why you didn't respond or whatever? And they did get a response. Saying, no, we had to pass on this, or we can't get this for another 2 weeks, whatever the situation was. But no, 1 is fine. You did everything correct. Obviously, if you show us that you solicited 3 vendors with 3 emails, it went to a specific vendor or phone call with a phone script, and you only got 1 quote, you're going to be good in that. The main thing is that you did everything right on your end. So you definitely did everything right, even though you only got 1 quote.
Okay. From Patty, what is your guidance in regards to bids being done as a discount off catalog price list where multiple vendors are awarded?
Well, Patty, that's exactly what we're seeing. What we're seeing is there's no winners and no losers. So just as an illustration, it's me in my entity, whether I'm a cooperative or a school district, and a purchasing office, and I say, you know what, I'm gonna solicit 6 vendors for equipment and see if they'll give me a discount, give us their catalog and give us a discount price. off their equipment. And so where that really runs afoul of USDA regulations is there's no winner or losers. And really, you didn't ever put out a spec. There was no specification. And so in this situation, that's why they're non-compliant, because it's who sets retail. So people say, well, no, we had a winner and loser. This catalog gave me 10% off their retail, and this catalog gave me 20% off, so I want 20%. But that's not even what we see as USDA regulated or regulations, because there was no spec. So there has to be a specification that goes out, and it has to outline what it is you're wanting to purchase. And there has to be a price submitted back to you, either through a proposal formally or through a quote if you're under 50. And that way you have winners and losers, and you have an award based upon price. And you really get a price, then you don't get these percentages off. Because again, where are they starting at? There's really no starting point. They could be all over the place. One could tell you they're going to give you 35% off, and you still may be paying retail. So that's why true traditional procurement under the USDA guidelines does not allow those percentages off.
Okay. From Sarah, there's a quotation of CFR in which it states the non-federal entity must perform a cost or price analysis in connection with every procurement action in excess of the simplified acquisition threshold, including contract modifications. The method and degree of analysis is dependent on the facts surrounding the particular procurement situation. But as a starting point, the non-federal entity must make independent estimates before receiving bids or proposals. The simplified acquisition threshold is set at $250,000. Why did the slide say that an independent estimate and cost price analysis is required for every formal procurement action when the federal law does not require such?
The USDA says that it's anything over the simplified threshold. And they allow each state to set their simplified threshold, and the state of Texas set at 50. So that's why we use 50 here in the state of Texas. We can always be more restrictive than the federal government, but we can't be less restrictive. So in this case, we're more restrictive. We're at 50,000, and that's why that's our simplified threshold in the state of Texas, unless a district board, governing board, sets the threshold lower than 50, and they do have a right to do that.
Okay, from Mike, for equipment grants from 2018, our awarded amount was just over 11K. I asked for quotes from vendors and received 3 quotes from buy board vendors. I selected the best price. Is that the correct procedure?
So Mike, obviously there's details to each one of these questions, and yours, there's things that we would have to know, maybe not. It depends on if that particular piece of equipment that you wanted to purchase, if there was true specs that were sent to those 3 vendors. That's why we say buy boards. A good way to use buy boards is use them to get vendors, like we used to do a yellow page. You send them your piece of equipment, the specs on it, and say, I need a price on this. And that price may be delivered, or it may be turnkey. I want it completely installed. That's up to you, the school district. However, not knowing what the buy board did, not knowing how they this could be one of those catalog prices where they gave a percentage off. I can't say whether this is in compliance or not. Again, if you gave each vendor a specification of the equipment you needed, and they all saw the same thing, and they provided a price, and you want the best price, you should be great. But we don't see that a lot of times in buy boards. So I'm hesitant to go any further with that.
Okay, and Nikita, what are the thresholds again? Also, our local district policy supersedes TDAs if districts is higher.
So no, I'm going to go back to what I said a while ago about federal. The federals set their thresholds, and then states have a right to set their thresholds. We can never go higher than the federal government's threshold, and districts can set their own threshold, but they can never go above our threshold. So let's just use formal as a good example. The feds are at 250. The state of Texas is at 50. A district can never set their formal threshold higher than 50 because that's the state. They can go lower if they like. They can always be more restrictive. So in this case, Texas is at 50. So a district's simplified threshold can never be more than 50. It can be lower than 50, but can never be higher. Right now, the micro's at 10K, and then anything over micro is considered a small, and that goes up to our simplified threshold, which in Texas is 50. And then obviously over that, it's all formal.
Okay, from Derek, you mentioned a category of office supplies, but is there any restriction that we can have a more granular categories like paper, pens, notebooks, etc.?
Well, that's where Derek, that's where that question comes in, where you got to say, okay, let's think about this ethically. Let's think about this in light of circumventing the procurement methods. And so when we see those things broken out into what I call these subcategories, I mean, they're all office supplies. Using this example, use my example, and you brought it up as well. However, it's really hard to see those purchases as individual purchases that could be broken up into these subcategories when they are under a category as office supplies, because that's a standard. That's what you see consistently. And so usually another thing, Derek, is they're purchased from the same vendor, because that's the type of vendors you have. If we saw two office supply vendors and somebody broke up their categories into subcategories like you just stated, that would sure raise a flag. So I would really question using that method, and I would state that in these type of situations, you should really get quotes and stay within the threshold that is a category, and those subcategories could cause problems in a procurement review.
Okay, from Becky, when you talk about the 10% of contract not on the bid, how would the co-op keep track of it? Should the co-op track it, or is it 10% per member? Also, is it acceptable to award more than one vendor as long as they meet the requirements stated in the bid?
Well, let me answer this question in the pattern that it was asked. So the 10% is a contract, is if that provision is written in, we're going to use 10%, it's written into the contract. And the cooperative is one who did the procurement. Then the cooperative has to keep up with the velocity reports for each school district. We've talked to cooperatives about it quite a bit. It's very easy to do because they can get those on a monthly basis with what was purchased and the value. However, the school district has to have a responsibility and has to keep up that as well, because when this is all about contract management from the cooperative side and from the school side. So it is tracked through velocity reports, and so the value is kept up with monthly. And at the end of the contract year, when it's getting ready to renew, they know exactly what the value of that contract was. They have all the items that were on there, and any items that were purchased over those original specifications will be added in the renewal. But in no manner, in no way can they ever be over 10% of the contract. So the cooperative as a whole, so the 10% is not for the particular school district. It's for the full contract. So if you have 35 schools in one contract and it's a $10 million contract, well then 10% is in total. So yes, it's not looked at per school, it's looked at contract. That's why those velocity reports are looked at, and the cooperative has a responsibility to do that. However, the school needs to track those as well, so those can be validated. Is it acceptable to award more than one vendor? You can award more than one vendor, absolutely. But it has to be written into your RFP language. So you basically, and we do the same thing with state, we have the right to award two vendors or award multiple vendors if necessary. It depends on when that's necessary. We see that in processing because obviously there's a lot of pounds of chicken and there's two processors and they give some to this and some to that processor. However, I don't see that a lot in school grocery bids, but you could very well do it if you had it in the RFP and you had it appropriately written.
Mitch, this is Jackie Cantu. May I add on just one other aspect?
Absolutely,
to your response?
Please, yeah, jump in there.
I'll just throw in another voice so you don't feel like the only one talking. But the other thing too, I just want to clarify in this question is when you are talking about the co-op, just remember that you are talking about the school districts that make up that co-op as a collective.
Yes.
And so also remember that if you are referring to the co-op as in terms of the third-party vendor or some other vendor that you have hired to manage the cooperative, now you're talking about another contract that you have to take a look at to see what is that third-party vendor or that vendor that you have an agreement with, what is their responsibility to these bids to see who is tracking what. And so Mitch's response is, I'm in agreement with it. I just wanted to point out that this question is, I think, alluding to another contract that you may have to reference when you are referring to your co-op, if you're actually referring to the third-party vendor you have hired to manage the school districts that make up that co-op.
Thank you,
Thanks,
Jackie. And let me add that that's why we talked about in the forecasting slide, it's on the school districts to understand those contracts and know what's active, and even to get into the weeds or get into the details. Okay, wait a minute, is this a cooperative? Who's managing that cooperative? Am I dealing with a cooperative, or is there a third party that's managing this cooperative? So all those things are at play, and that's why it's very important for you all to manage those contracts and understand before you purchase who does what and what your responsibility is.
Okay, thank you. And so at this time, we've come to the 3:30 point at the conclusion of this training. We do have about another 50 questions in queue. So what we are going to dedicate to do is we will take all the questions back in the chat, and we will respond to them all individually and post them with this training so that every one of these questions that are in the chat will be answered. I apologize, we couldn't get to them all during this time, but it is a wonderful thing that y'all are asking questions, and we're going to dedicate ourselves to make sure that every single one of them are answered. So we appreciate y'all taking the time to come to this procurement training. We know that a lot of y'all were on vacation or the districts were closed at this time, so we appreciate you taking your time out to come to this training and all learn about procurement. We do look forward to, and we invite you to our next procurement training. That is in 2 weeks from now on Wednesday from 2 to 3:30, where we will be discussing procurement and the administrative review. So please attend that training, ask questions, and we appreciate y'all. Thank you very much. And please go to the website where this webinar will be posted. The Q&As will be posted with the answers, and a self-paced training will be posted. So thank y'all. Have a great day.